I go by Michelle. Growing up, my twin sister Linda and I had quite different experiences like night and day. I was not the golden girl. She was. While our mother was the ideal housewife, emphasizing home and family and pushing us to follow her example, our dad, a rigorous university professor, was always buried in books and lectures. Being at home felt to me from early on as like going through an endless critiquing session. The ideal family that my parents had in mind excluded a daughter who preferred to keep to herself and wore band t-shirts. Usually addressed at me when I came up for breakfast wearing headphones on, trying to block out the world, my mother's favorite line was, "Michelle, why can't you be more like your sister?" Linda, on the other hand, reveled in praise. Turning her immaculate hair over her shoulder, she would ask, "I just don't get why it's so hard for you to put on a nice dress and smile more." She sounded to be from another planet. One very difficult Saturday as our family prepared for one of Dad's faculty parties, a huge bore but a required occasion for us, I chose to resist in the tinniest manner I knew how to do. I applied my darkest eyeliner and a pair of boots, clearly falling short of the needed criteria. "You are not going out like that, are you?" Mom saw me on the steps, staring angrily at my boots as though they were dirty. I shrugged, as usual, in defense. "Do not see why not." She sighed, that long drawn-out type that stated I was the worst letdown in her otherwise orderly life. "Please, Michelle, just this once, could you attempt to fit in?" "Why for? So you can act as though our family is ideal." Weary of the same old dispute, I shot back. She said, her voice harsh enough to indicate business, "It's not about pretending. It's about showing respect for your father." Hearing the conversation, Linda arrived galloping down the hall, her heels clicking on the wooden floor like a judge approaching the bench. "Mom's right, Amy. It's not difficult to look decent. Why must everything constantly be difficult for you?" "I would not want to be your clone, Linda." I snapped and felt my face heat. More than anything, I disliked feeling the odd one out in my own house. I despised these debates and hated being compared. Dad showed up at the bottom of the stairs, eyebrows wrinkled. "Michelle, go change. Just now. We are leaving in 15 minutes, he said with great clarity. His voice did not allow any debate. He neither shouted nor felt compelled to. His displeasure in his eyes was sufficient to send me storming back to my room to change my boots for basic flats and wash half of my eyeliner away. Except for the classical music Dad insisted on playing since it was relaxing, the car was silent as we traveled to the party. I watched the woods blurring past out the window. I vowed to myself in that instant that eventually I would live a life free from direction on what to wear, behave, or who to be. I would be free of these expectations someday. Only in my room could I pretend to be anywhere else, any place else in the home. My room was mine, and like the rest of the house, bursting with my parents' choices. It was not much, just 3 walls covered in music posters and sketches, but it was my means of escape from the demands of my family. Dad knocked one evening as I was attempting to bury myself in a playlist of my favorite bands and marched into my room, his face set in a familiar grimace. "Michelle, turn that noise down, and why hadn't you worked with Linda today? You both have tests coming up," he continued, sounding austere. Pulling one earpiece, I stared up at him, attempting to keep my voice under control. "I have been researching, not with Linda. I pick things better working alone." Dad shook his head, obviously not believing me. "You are familiar with the guidelines. Your sister earns decent marks. You should be following suit. Why you constantly have to complicate things escapes me." "It's not about making things difficult," I responded, my annoyance mounting. "I simply find it strange that I have to follow Linda's instructions exactly. Surely I have my own preferred method of learning." He answered that differently, then turned to another concern. "And those dear buddies of yours? Yesterday I watched you with them at the cafe. They hardly seem to be a positive impact. You should be spending more time with the daughters of my colleagues. They are more suited. I sensed my temper getting hot. Relevant for what? For your benefit. Because they pretend to love those dull academic events and discuss economics. Mom showed up at the door, her voice shrill before he could reply. Michelle, your father makes correct observations. Those girls come from decent homes. They know how to act. These are the kind of buddies you need to wish for. Rising, I faced each of them. What if I object to friends selected for me? What if I want to pick my own companions, decide what I study, or even decide what I want to be? That's enough, Michelle. Mom insisted. Your father has made sure your future resides at the university, and once you graduate, you will have to start considering a place for residence. We have already spoke on this. Settling down. The word seemed to be a prison sentence. You mean considering being someone's wife like Linda? Is that all you believe me to be appropriate for? Mom's voice kept stern while her expression softened somewhat. We desire for you what is best. Traveling the road we have chosen will lead to a decent existence. A fine life. I kept saying, the bitterness of irony in my mouth. Is it a good life if it's someone else's idea of good? None answered. They didn't need to. We all realized there was no benefit in debating. Like Linda, they had their ideas and wanted me to do as advised. Though always together, Linda and I were like two sides of the same coin, never on the same page. The variations between us became much more obvious at the university Dad taught. She loved business management, the golden child, usually nodding in lectures and posing intelligent questions that made the speaker grin. Me personally, I stayed in the same program, but it felt like wearing a shoe on the wrong foot. Awkward, unpleasant, and just plain wrong. One afternoon, Linda rushed in, her notes neat, her grin ready, while I was laboring through a stack of textbooks in the library. Hey, Amy, tonight you are attending the study group? Professor Hall suggested he might drop by. It would be excellent for us to show up, she continued, her tone light but firm. I looked up, weight of her expectations weighing in mind. No, I do not believe this. You know, those are not exactly my scene. She wrinkled and set her books down with a thud that mirrored her contempt. It's not about that being your scene, Amy. It is about leaving appropriate impressions. You should start giving this some thought. We will be graduating soon. I gave a shrug and turned back to study. I am treating it seriously, just not in a way that irritates me. For what reason should I pretend? Because, Amy, sometimes you have to play the game to get ahead, she remarked, waving at her orderly notes and color-coded textbooks. It's about doing what's required, not about like it. I shook my head, then scraped my chair back. Well, maybe I'm bored with following everyone else's advised course of action. You never gave that any thought. Her voice softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. Amy, I am simply trying to assist you. Dad will not always be here to correct problems. Keep pushing everyone away, and what will you do? Perhaps I will sort things out on my own. Feeling a flash of rebellion, I said maybe I don't need to follow Dad's road or yours. Linda sighed, obviously annoyed. You really are rather stubborn. Just try, friend. If not for yourself, for me. Show up tonight and chat to Professor Hall. It isn't going to kill you. I looked at her, truly looked, and saw someone who cared in her own way rather than just my beautiful sister. Fine, I'll give it some thought. I gave in, not ready to promise more. Thanks, she responded, her smile coming back. You know, it's not really terrible. You might even appreciate it given some time. I mumbled, doubt it, but I knew I had lost this round. I would show up for Linda, sit through another pointless conversation, and nod at appropriate moments. Just a few hours, how horrible could it be? As it happened, not as horrible as I had imagined. When Professor Hall was not standing on a podium, he was really fascinating. I even posed a question, which Linda gave a startled but happy glance. Linda nodded at me later as we headed back to our room. As seen here, not that bad then. That fleeting serenity was not long-lasting. Linda introduced us to her fiancé, a lawyer 12 years older who already lived exactly what our parents dreamed of and was already well established. Happy, Mom and Dad praised Linda for such wise decision. Then they turned to look hopefully at me. "Now, Michelle, it's your turn to find someone suitable," Dad stated one evening over dinner, his voice suggesting my limited time. Mom nodded fervently, already sketching out my existence as though it were just one of her orderly pursuits. "Imagine your future, sweetheart. Someone with strong status who can support you." I recall being caught looking at my plate. Mom meticulously arranged Linda's wedding from the bridesmaids' gowns to the flowers. Everything highlighted her ideal view of family reputation. Mom visited Linda frequently following the wedding to offer guidance and ensure Linda's life unfolded just as she had intended. Seeing this made one clear. I wanted no one else to be in charge of my life. One day, engrossed in ideas of fleeing the life my parents envisioned for me, I was strolling down the street when I heard the low rumble of a motorcycle. I looked. Curiosity drove me to see him. Pulling up next to me, Brian had a carefree smile and a leather jacket. Over the sound of the engine, he said, "You look like you need a ride," a cheeky glitter in his eyes. I hesitated, then at his outstretched hand, turned back toward the road home. What did I have to forfeit? "Yes, why not?" I said, my voice a mix of anxiety and enthusiasm. Rising onto the rear of his bike, I had an adrenaline surge as we raced off. I laughed, a real laugh for the first time in a long time as the wind blasted through my hair. Brian yelled something about showing me his world, and I tightened myself, not wanting the moment to stop. We stopped at a diner that drew bikers. Brian shared with me his life as a welder, his love of bikes, and his adoration of the open road over burgers and fries. Raw and authentic was quite different from anything I had known. "Living like this makes you afraid," my voice hardly rising over the din of plates and conversation around us. I asked, "Afraid?" "No, it's rather exciting. One never knows what is ahead. Is it not better than having all of your life scheduled?" he answered, each word lighting his gaze. We convened in secret over the next several weeks. Every ride Brian's motorcycle pushed me closer to the life I dreamed of and farther from the life I was supposed to live. I yearned for speed, the quest. It was about feeling alive as much as the excitement. Empowering. Brian turned to me one evening while we watched the sunset from a quiet vantage point. "Michelle, I ride not merely to get away. I get on to feel alive, to count every moment toward anything. Every minute seems to have value while you are around." With a rapid pulse, I leaned in toward him. Never had felt like this before. "Brian, you let me feel free." He grinned and drew me in. "Then let's not return to merely existing. Live with me." 5 months with Brian seemed to be a lifetime of events I had always dreamed of. My heart shouted yes before my voice could utter the word on the day he suggested under the stars with the soft rumble of his Harley in the background. Except for one major flaw. My parents, it was ideal. Introducing Brian to them terrified me. He was everything they disapproved of, his wild energy, his basic but contented life as a welder, his rough edges. But love gave me confidence, and I felt it was time they should know. Brian wore his typical leather vest, red t-shirt, tattered trousers, and a bandana when I took him home. About him I loved. He was always himself. I felt the weight of my parents' criticism already as we strolled up the driveway. Mom's face became white as soon as we entered upon Brian, her eyes widening in shock. "What in the universe, Michelle?" Her voice just a whisper, she gasped. Dad responded more sharply. His words were like knives. "Who is this and why is he wearing thug clothes in our house?" I inhaled deeply to calm my phrase. "Mom, Dad, Brian here is you. I love the man, you know. We are planning to be married." The quiet was absolutely overwhelming. Then Dad looked at Brian, his voice full of contempt. "Married? Young man, what kind of living do you lead? Describe your credentials." Brian, bless him, did not waver. "I work as a welder. Following high school, I attended several specialist classes. I keep an honest life and work hard." My parents looked at me with a mixture of dread and incredulity. Mom gave the impression of maybe passing out. "A welder? Michelle, you really cannot be serious." Dad's voice grew louder, rage erupting. "You look to us to bless this, to trash your future for a welder." I sensed my determination becoming harder. "Indy, he makes me happy. Surely what counts should be this." "But the life you'll lead," Mom said, her voice shaking. "It will be the life I choose." I shot back, my own voice gathering force. Dad shook his head, his choice obvious. "Neither can we nor will we support this. Should you choose him, you should not expect to be a member of this family." Though not his choice, the finality in his voice devastated my heart. Brian gave me the power to face them by squeezing my hand. Then I go with Brian. I choose us. I deliberate on my happiness. Dad's jaw tightened and Mom started crying. Dad remarked, his voice icy, "If you walk out with him, don't bother coming back." My heart was a muddle of emotions. Pain, relief, excitement, and anxiety all blended together as I left my parents' house with Brian. The evening air seemed different, as though every breath marked a fresh start. I moved farther into a fresh life. For a while we rode silently, the motorbike under us roaring steadily. Brian looked gravely at me when we stopped at a tiny diner on the outskirts of town. "Are you sure, Michelle, about this? Really sure, I mean? After tonight, there is no going back." His eyes dart across mine for any hint of uncertainty. I nodded and firmly squeezed his hand. "I have never been so definite about anything. It feels proper to be with you. It seems like what I should be doing." He grinned that careless, seductive smile that had captured me on our first day together. "Let's do it all right then. Let us start our life together." We came upon a peaceful booth in the corner of the diner. Without asking, the waitress brought us 2 coffees. We sat there organizing our next actions. "So, first," asked stirring cream into my coffee. I inquired and watched it whirl. "We will have to locate somewhere to live, at least temporarily, and maybe hunt for work." Brian said, sounding pragmatic but hopeful, "I have some friends that could help us get started." "It's going to be tough, isn't it?" More as a statement than a query, I said. What we were doing was beginning to sink in reality. Brian stretched across the table to lay his palm over mine. "It could be, but we will manage it together. Tough is nothing fresh for either of us, right?" I laughed, a brief, honest flash of pleasure. "Right." We spoke and planned hours in the meal together. Brian would periodically bring up a concept that seemed so wild and free that it would cause my heart to leap. "Just you, myself, and the open road. Maybe one day we will save enough to travel that road trip across the nation." "I like that," I answered, letting myself dream larger than I had ever done. Riding back into the city, we started looking. The next few weeks burst with action. On the outskirts of town, we located a little apartment. Though not sophisticated, it was ours. Brian started working at a nearby garage, and I took shifts at a diner nearby. Though life was difficult, it was ours. We made do with what we had. Every night when we returned home to see one another, it felt as though we had everything. Months later, we decided it was time to formalize it and married in a little private ceremony. I clung to a meager hope that my family would show up, that they would see how delighted I was, and release their preconceptions. But no congrats arrived, and the chairs we had set aside for them remained empty. The day was lovely as it was ours, even with the ache of their absence. I moved really close to Brian's mother over time. Calling me her daughter, she greeted me with wide arms and filled up the void left by my own family. Some of the hurt left by my parents' rejection healed under her kindness and acceptance. Once Brian finished some more training and earned a certification as an underwater welder, things finally began to look good for him and me. His pay shot to $230,000 annually. That shift made a big difference. Friends, we were able to purchase a townhouse in a lovely neighborhood, the kind of location I had always wanted, but never considered I would really live in. I started with Brian's company as a dispatcher. It was more than simply employment. It felt like I was helping the man I loved to create our future together. We rode his bike out of the city on weekends, speeding across twisting roads and savoring the amazing vistas of landscape. Those times were sheer delight, wind in my hair and Brian's warmth against my back. Living nearby, my mother-in-law started paying regular visits. She came looking a little disturbed one afternoon while Brian was experimenting in the garage and I was preparing coffee. She continued, settling down at the kitchen table. "There's been some bad news. Something about a university professor engaged in a harassment scandal." My heart missed a beat. Did they name who it was? Fearing the response, I attempted to keep my voice steady. She gave her head a shake. "No, on the radio they omitted a name, but you know how these things turn out. By now it most likely shows all over the TV." Nodding, I experienced a tsunami of anxiety. Turning on the TV, I tuned in to the news. Indeed, there was a scandal report available. My father's face showed up on the screen as I had anticipated. The anchor went over the charges against him, and I had a chilly feeling of incredulity. I turned off the TV and sank down hard to try to sort the news. Brian observed my expression when he came in drying his hands with a cloth. "What's wrong, honey?" His brow wrinkled in sympathy as he inquired. I sucked hard, my voice hardly a whisper. "It's my dad. He has been charged with stalking a pupil." Brian's gaze turned grave for a time before he stepped over to take my hand. "Apologies, Michelle. That is challenging news. How do you want to approach this?" I shook my head, uncertain of anything. "I am not sure. What really can I even do? Not close anymore is what we are." Squeezing my hand, he indicated he understood. "I am here for you, anything you need. Right now, we don't have to work it all out." Before acting, I chose to wait and watch events develop. Knowing Brian would be by my side, whatever choice I made gave me the fortitude to face whatever lay ahead. Until that surprising afternoon at work, life had been calm. Then a familiar automobile drew into the parking lot. After not seeing my parents in a long time, the sight of them set out a range of feelings I had long put to rest. They both had somewhat different appearances. Mom had dropped a lot of weight and appeared considerably older, while Dad seemed broken, a shell of the strict man he once was. The controversy had taken its toll. Seeing me, my mother hurried forward with arms outstretched as though years of alienation and criticism could be wiped away in a single glance. Not now, though, I could embrace her. Rather, I retreated and grabbed Brian's hand to get strength from his presence. Mom responded, her voice shaking with passion. "Michelle, it was so hard to find you." Always the direct one, Dad spoke angrily and bitterly and got right to the point. "You know, I felt unfairly accused. When I sought assistance from your sister's spouse, that leech demanded a fortune. Your sister backed him, and now we were kicked out. We depend on your assistance." I looked at them, incredulity and rage whirling inside me. "Help? You turn up and expect help after all these years?" Mom said in great desperation, "We have nowhere else to go. They have also turned against us. We considered maybe staying with you." I almost found the ridiculousness funny. "Stay beside me. Once you turned away from me." You made it rather plain that I was no longer your daughter. Dad's cheeks reddened as his old passion flared. Michelle, you owe us. Ultimately, what we have done for you. Feeling a fresh determination, I said, that's where you're wrong. I cut them off, Brian squeezing my hand for encouragement. I have nothing to owe you. Chose my happiness over your needs, so you threw me out. Now you want to just move in and behave like we are a family once more. The matter was spiraling out of hand, and I could see others observing a little gathering starting to develop. Mom began to cry, her sobs clear and attracting even more attention. Through tears, she said, "You're being unappreciative after everything we've done for you." I breathed deeply, my choice obvious. "No, Mom," says, "I am not undulating in thanks. I have spare time and am content. You made decisions, now you have to live with them." Heard my dad screaming as we left, but Brian reached over and softly instructed the security staff, "Don't let them come here again." Love and calm permeated the next months, which sped by. For our expanding family, a son welcomed as a fresh start. Neither did my parents ever return. I saw them last on that day in the parking lot. Though part of me mourned for what could have been, I knew I had chosen wisely for my family and for myself.